I walk in the shadows between worlds, and it is there I have finally glimpsed upon what lives in the dark corners of the earth.
Lovecraftian horror and its poster squid Cthulhu are unique because of its timeless sense of horror, which represents our own human smallness, how it shatters our sense of importance and our human understanding of the universe. Lovecraftian horror forces us to confront the fear of how truly little humanity means. So, to use Cthulhu in video games is often difficult. Once Cthulhu becomes an enemy that can be defeated by practical means, the effect is lost. What was once a gibbering mass of tentacles and claws becomes just some rambunctious calamari when its health bar is depleted. Call of Cthulhu, Dark Corners of the Earth combines the disempowerment of survival horror with its Lovecraftian concept of trivializing human agency into a ludological effect. It uses wild fluctuations in its difficulty curve to establish a sense of horror. It is shown often via the narrative that humans may have some power in petty squabbles between other lesser mortal beings, but when confronted by something so immense that it is beyond understanding, this false sense of power is ripped away. When Jack enters Innsmouth, there is a sense of danger by the less than welcoming disposition of the townspeople, both verbally and visually.
I've been hired by the regional manager of the First National.
And I'm Constable Burke, and I'm the law around these parts, and I'm still not talking to you. Now get lost.
They are blatantly hostile, and if Jack is observant enough, he can find questionable activities going on in the town. Call of Cthulhu takes its time setting up ambience of being hunted down in a town that doesn't want you around. The townspeople watch Jack wherever he goes and dodge any questions he asks, no matter how benign.
You better keep your trap shut. I won't tell him anything.
That's not even including Jack's visions of something inhuman stalking him from the rooftops. The tense atmosphere culminates in the hotel chase scene, where the townspeople decide that this outsider has to go. Jack is completely vulnerable and verbally frightened. This panic sensation is then transferred to the player, making the whole scene wonderfully tense. All Jack, and by extension the player, can do is run, ripping away power and filling that void with fear. After escaping the townsfolk, Jack begins to start collecting weapons. This changes the player-to-enemy dynamic, where Jack has become the most powerful agent of the field. You don't need to hide from dead people.
He's dead. Looks like a bad case of lead poisoning.
Josh Schneider describes a common approach to modifying difficulty is to think of the relation between player and enemy action as a mathematical formula. On normal, the relationship is balanced in a 1-to-1 ratio. When modifying the ratio, such as on easy, it may become player action equals double and enemy action equals half. A common method to establish fear in a player is to simply make their survival a challenge, survival horror. Make resources scarce, and make the player action equal half, and the enemy action equal double. Staying true to its Lovecraftian nature, when Call of Cthulhu increases its difficulty, player action becomes half, and enemy action equals infinity. For example, let's take a look at the Shoggoth in the Marsh Refinery. It exists everywhere at once. You can't touch it, you can barely look at its unfathomable form. All you can do is run, and hopefully Jack's done his cardio, because running means sprinting. The transition between dealing with the people of Innsmouth to the Shoggoth demonstrates well what I mean by sharp and terrifying difficulty curves. Call of Cthulhu allows you, for a long enough time, to be the most powerful agent on the field. A rule of thumb in pretty much every video game is that the player starts the game weak, with enough power to defeat low-level enemies. The game ensures a beginner's bracket, so first-time players can become comfortable with the game as they play. As the game progresses, new enemies are introduced, who require more powerful weapons and more complex strategies from the player's experience to beat. Combat-oriented games are meant to feel like the player is always fighting an uphill battle, but never knocked out. We start with mean townsfolk. Some are human, and others are hybrids between deep ones and humans. Then we fight deep ones, the much more powerful and savage fish people. Then there's the difficulty curve that hits you so fast that you need reconstructive surgery, the air-filled tunnels. Here, Jack obtains an alien energy gun, Half-Life style. The player would assume obtaining an alien lightning gun would dismay any sense of difficulty, and it does. It creates this sense of invincibility. But then there's the polyps at the stone bridge. While the player begins combat with the polyps, they quickly learn that a fully charged lightning gun is the only weapon which is able to do any damage to the polyps. This has some massive kickback, which doesn't blend well with a slippery, narrow stone bridge. Even if you aren't afraid of the enemy you can never fight gravity and reloading the save point, having to trek all the way back and try not to break all of your legs on the way down. The polyps are a perfect storm of horror. First of all, they are visually horrifying. It's like the worst parts of a fetus in a potato got Cronenberg. Plus, they're huge. Since you have to look at these monstrosities while you fight them, there is a high chance Jack is going to start going mad, which makes the fight more difficult for the player. Creating a video game which incorporates combat and Cthulhu is a tricky business, because Lovecraftian horror is not an enemy, but a presence, a sense of dread that lurks in the back of your mind, and Call of Cthulhu attempts this with the best of its ability. To tease the player with safety and rationality before ripping it away and replacing it with irrelevance and insanity. Despite it being incomplete and can barely function without fan-made patches, Call of Cthulhu: Dark Corners of the Earth is an excellent translation of Lovecraft to a media which doesn't often support this type of horror.